There is a war happening right now that you cannot see with your physical eyes, and if you have been carrying a strange heaviness in your chest lately, a pressure that settles somewhere between your sternum and your throat and refuses to be named, it is because your body already knows what your mind is still processing. You were in the center of a battlefield, dressed as a relationship, a friendship, a family dynamic, a workplace, a spiritual community, and the enemy was standing right next to you the entire time, wearing your trust like a costume. The kind of war I'm speaking about does not announce itself with drums or declarations. It arrives disguised as love, as connection, as someone who needs you, and then it spends every quiet moment extracting the very thing that makes you irreplaceable. Because here is what nobody tells you about being a chosen one in a world full of spiritual predators. Your frequency is not invisible to the enemy. It is, in fact, the exact thing they came for. They felt you before they understood you. They circled your energy the way a starving animal circles the only fire in a frozen forest, not because they wanted to warm themselves beside it, but because something deep and unhealed inside them needed to consume it. You were not simply a person to them. You were a resource, and they spent years harvesting what they could never generate themselves. The exhaustion you feel when you try to explain why certain relationships leave you depleted even when nothing visibly wrong happened is the first symptom of this invisible extraction. You gave and you gave, and you smiled while giving. Because that is what chosen ones do. They serve, they cover, they stabilize, and you watch the other person grow louder and more confident and more visible while you quietly shrank into the background, wondering why your light seemed to dim every time they entered the room. That dimming was not accidental. That dimming was operational. And the moment you finally stepped back, the moment you withdrew your presence from their ecosystem, the bomb they never knew was inside them began its countdown. You will not defeat this level of spiritual attack with willpower alone. The cords that attach a parasite to a chosen one are not emotional threads you can simply decide to cut with positive thinking. They are woven into your nervous system, embedded in your prayer patterns, threaded through your dreams, and activated every time you check your phone, hoping for an apology that the enemy has already decided they will never deliver. What you are dealing with is an energy hex masquerading as a human relationship, a trauma bond wrapped in the language of love. A narcissistic attachment that mimics intimacy so convincingly that even your own body gets confused about whether the pain of holding on is worse than the terror of letting go. This is the precise architecture of spiritual warfare against the chosen, and it is exactly why I poured everything I know about breaking these invisible chains into the 3 keys to a prosperous life trilogy, whose unlocking link is in the pinned comment. Access it before the fog descends again and convinces you that the prison was actually a home, because the enemy banks on your hesitation. Every hour you spend second-guessing your decision to leave. Every night you lie awake, replaying conversations, trying to find the moment you misunderstood them, is an hour their system remains plugged into your frequency. The spiritual court has already ruled. The verdict is already written. But the chosen one must take the action of closing the portal themselves, and that action begins with understanding the full architecture of what was happening while you were inside it. Now I need you to travel back into your own body and feel the particular quality of what it was like to exist in that dynamic before you found the language to describe it. You were not simply tired. Tired implies rest can fix it. What you felt was a deeper erosion, a slow dismantling of your ability to trust your own perception. The narcissist, the energy vampire, the spiritual predator, does not attack you with obvious cruelty in the beginning. The opening campaign is always about elevation. They saw something in you, they told you. You were different, they said. Nobody has ever understood them the way you do. And you felt it, did not you? That particular warmth of being chosen by someone you had already identified as extraordinary. What you did not know yet was that you had walked into a carefully constructed feeding environment, and every compliment they offered you in those early days was actually a diagnostic tool. They were mapping the specific shape of your hunger for validation, so they would know exactly where to apply pressure later. That smile that never quite reached their eyes when they praised you in front of others, that was not warmth. That was reconnaissance. They were filing away the intelligence they gathered from your reaction, cataloging how much approval you needed, measuring the precise dosage of affection required to keep you compliant and available. And the physical sensation you felt in those moments, that flutter of warmth in your chest that felt like belonging, was your nervous system being chemically manipulated by a pattern it had learned in childhood to associate with safety. The dream started arriving sometime during the middle of that season, the one where you are running but your legs refuse to carry you. You are in a landscape that shifts and distorts, and there is something behind you, a pressure more than a presence, a force that you know without seeing would destroy you if it caught up. Your legs feel like they are moving through concrete, through deep water, through time itself standing still against you. You pump your arms and lean forward, and the ground beneath you offers no traction, and the gap between you and whatever chases you stays constant no matter the effort you pour into escape. You wake from that dream, gasping, not screaming, but with the specific breathlessness of someone whose body just fought a war while their mind believed it was resting. That dream is not random. The subconscious is not generating abstract imagery for entertainment. That dream is the spiritual report of what your soul is navigating in real time. The enemy has placed a pursuit hex on your frequency, a specific energetic weight designed to exhaust your momentum before your breakthrough can fully materialize. The legs of lead are not symbolic. They are the sensation of oppressive prayer working against your divine assignment, of coordinated spiritual interference from someone who sees your acceleration and has dedicated emotional and spiritual resources to interrupting it. The intrusive thought that follows that dream, the one that whispers maybe you are not moving because you are not meant to move forward, maybe the resistance is a sign that you belong exactly where you started. That thought is not yours. It arrived with the hex. It was planted by the operation, and the primitive memory it activates, the one from childhood where you worked hard and were still not enough, is the specific wound they targeted when they selected you. Here is what the spiritual tribunal sees when it reviews the file of someone who has deployed a pursuit hex against a chosen one. The court does not see a relationship gone wrong or a personality conflict or two misaligned people who simply grew apart. It sees a calculated act of spiritual aggression against a vessel carrying divine assignment, and it processes that act with a severity that the human mind cannot fully comprehend. Every nightmare they sent into your sleep space was logged. Every prayer offered against your progress was documented. Every word spoken against your name in their private conversations. Every time they described you to others using language designed to reduce your credibility. Every quiet wish they made for your failure. Every ritual of comparison in which they measured their life against yours with resentment rather than inspiration. It was all entered into the record. And the chosen one must understand this, not for the comfort of seeing the enemy punished, but for the clarity of understanding why their own circumstances are shifting with such dramatic force right now. The spiritual blockage that Pursuit Hex represented was holding back a specific tier of divine blessing. When you stepped out of range, when you withdrew the target, the hex had nowhere to land, and it returned to sender with the full authority of the court stamped on its return. What the enemy sent into your nights is now walking through their days. They do not know where the weight came from. They only know that everything that once felt manageable now feels like the ground is dissolving. Now sit with the image of someone who genuinely cannot stand you, truly cannot bear the fact of your existence, smiling at you across a room. Not a neutral smile. A warm smile, a welcoming smile, the kind that would convince any observer in that room that they adore you. The smile that reaches their teeth but dies somewhere just before the eyes and leaves behind a flatness, a calculation, a stillness that your body registers before your mind forms a single word about it. You have seen that smile. You have received that compliment that felt like a knife wrapped in silk, the praise delivered in a tone so perfectly calibrated to sound like celebration, while simultaneously planting a seed of inadequacy so small and so precisely targeted that you spent the next 3 days watering it without realizing you were doing it. That is the poisoned compliment, the signature weapon of the spiritually malicious, the mark of someone who has refined their warfare into an art form. They told you your work was good, and somehow you left the conversation doubting whether you should continue. They congratulated you on your success, and somehow the congratulations carried a weight that made the success feel smaller than it had felt before they spoke. That is not you being oversensitive. That is you accurately reading the frequency beneath the performance. Your discernment is not broken. Your discernment is the exact faculty they have spent years trying to disable, because a chosen one with fully operational discernment cannot be manipulated for long. The psychological warfare dimension of this particular weapon is extraordinarily sophisticated because it exploits the chosen one's most sacred quality, the commitment to seeing the good in others. You do not want to believe someone who smiles at you and offers what sounds like kindness is actually deploying a spiritual strike. Your nature resists that interpretation because your nature is oriented toward love. So you override your own body intelligence, you override the physical sensation of contraction that arrived with their words. You override the quiet alarm your nervous system sounded the moment the compliment left their mouth. And you replace all of that accurate data with a narrative your conscious mind prefers, which is that you misread it, that you are projecting, that not everyone is trying to harm you. And in that moment of override, in that generous reinterpretation, the hex lands. The seed of inadequacy finds the soil of your doubt and begins its underground work. The spiritual tribunal watches this transaction with a grief I cannot adequately describe in human language, because it witnesses a being of divine origin choosing to distrust their own divine instrument in order to protect someone who is actively weaponizing their trust. Every chosen one reading this has done it. Every chosen one has gaslit themselves on behalf of the enemy. And the recovery, the full return to trusting your own perception absolutely, is one of the most profound acts of spiritual reclamation available to you. When they came into your life, they did not want what you had. Understand this with a precision that reaches all the way down to the cellular level. They did not want your resources, your connections, your opportunities, your achievements as objects they could acquire and own. What they wanted was the source. They wanted to be the kind of person capable of generating what you generated. They looked at the way people gravitated toward your energy, and they did not feel admiration. They felt a rage so deep and so disorienting that the only way to metabolize it was to frame it as contempt. If they could convince themselves that you were actually inferior, actually overrated, actually the beneficiary of luck and circumstance, rather than the carrier of genuine frequency, then the gap between what you carried and what they lacked became something they could manage emotionally. So they began the operation of copying, not learning from you, not being inspired by you, but consuming you, wearing your ideas as their own in environments where you would hear about it secondhand, adopting your language, your spiritual vocabulary, your aesthetic sensibility, your relationship patterns, and presenting all of it as original content generated from their own depth. The blatant copy is one of the most spiritually exhausting forms of attack because it is designed to make you feel like your own identity is being dissolved, while simultaneously making you appear paranoid for naming what is happening. When you said quietly to someone you trusted that you noticed the pattern, you were probably met with the response that you were reading too much into it, that people share ideas, that nobody owns a thought, and you retreated. Again. The physical sensation of watching yourself be copied without credit is specific and unmistakable if you have lived it. There is a particular vertigo to it, a destabilization that goes beyond irritation or even anger. It touches something primal because identity theft at the energetic level is not metaphorical. When someone lifts the frequency you have cultivated through years of suffering and transformation and presents it as their natural output, they are not just borrowing your content. They are attempting to inherit your spiritual position. They are trying to occupy a frequency they did not earn, did not bleed for, did not survive the dark nights to arrive at. And the intrusive thought that accompanies this particular attack is the worst one of all because it arrives disguised as humility. It tells you that maybe you are not as original as you believed. Maybe your gifts are not as rare as you hoped. Maybe the enemy proving they can produce similar results means the results were never as exceptional as you thought. That thought is a lie delivered with surgical precision into the specific cavity of your deepest insecurity. The spiritual action required is not defensiveness, and it is not silence. It is the decision to continue producing from your authentic depth with the full knowledge that a counterfeit always exposes itself over time because it has no root system. What they copied can be mimicked, but not sustained. The frequency you carry cannot be transferred through imitation. It can only be grown through the particular alchemy of your specific suffering, and that suffering belongs to you alone. There is a particular hour in the night, somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning, when the body should be in its deepest rest, when the atmosphere shifts in a way that the sleeping mind cannot resist, and the waking mind cannot fully explain. You know this hour. You have felt the weight before you were conscious enough to name it. The pressure arrives at your chest first, a heaviness that is not physical in the way a hand pressing down is physical, but is felt with the same certainty. You try to move and discover that the signal from your mind to your body is traveling through something thick and resistant. Your eyes open, or you believe they open, and the room is the room you know, and yet everything in it feels altered, feels watched, feels charged, with a presence that the rational mind is already preparing its arguments against, even as the body registers it with complete and total certainty. Sleep paralysis is the chosen one's most intimate battlefield, because it happens in the precise space where the defenses are lowest and the spirit is most exposed. The psychological warfare dimension tells you this is a neurological event, a misfiring of the sleep cycle, a momentary glitch in the system that regulates the transition between sleep states. And there is a medical dimension to that explanation that is not false. But the chosen one, who has experienced this visitation, knows that the medical explanation and the spiritual reality are not mutually exclusive. The enemy who has been sending coordinated spiritual aggression in your direction does not stop that aggression when you close your eyes. In fact, the operations intensify in the hours when your conscious resistance is offline. Every tradition of every ancient civilization on the planet has a name for what visits in that hour, what sits on the chest, what presses down on the frequency of a targeted soul while they are suspended between worlds. Your primitive memory, if you go far enough back, carries this knowledge. Somewhere in your ancestry there is a lineage that understood how to protect the sleeping body, how to seal the room, how to close the spiritual portals before the lights went out. That knowledge was systematically stripped from chosen people across generations, specifically because it was protective, specifically because an awakened chosen one who knows how to seal their own spiritual perimeter is essentially untouchable. What you feel in that paralyzed darkness is not your imagination, and it is not a disorder. It is the pressure of an operation that has been given access to your space through every unguarded cord, every unclosed portal, every unresolved attachment to someone who carries darkness and calls it personality. The spiritual action is the sealing, the complete, deliberate, non-negotiable sealing of every energetic entry point before sleep. And the divine promotion embedded in this particular attack is the invitation to develop a level of spiritual authority over your own atmosphere that most human beings never cultivate, because they were never targeted with enough intensity to discover it was necessary. You have stood in a room and felt the atmosphere change before you could identify the cause. One moment the air carried a certain lightness, a conversational ease, a warmth that made the space feel navigable and even joyful. And then the door opened, or a certain person walked in from another part of the building, and without a single word being spoken, something shifted. The temperature of the emotional environment dropped by degrees you can feel but cannot measure. The conversations that were flowing find friction. The laughter that was genuine becomes slightly performative. People begin monitoring themselves without knowing why they began monitoring themselves. That is not a coincidence of timing. That is the phenomenon I need you to understand with complete clarity. The silence in the room, the atmospheric heaviness that follows the arrival of a person who carries active envy, is a spiritual event that has measurable effects on everyone present, but is only fully perceived by the chosen one whose frequency is sensitive enough to register it. The reason you notice it before others do is not that you are more anxious or more paranoid or more emotionally reactive. It is that your discernment operates at a frequency that processes this kind of energetic information as a matter of design. You were built to read the room at the spiritual layer, not just the social one. As I teach with full depth and unfiltered precision to those who arrive at the 3 keys to a prosperous life trilogy, whose unlocking link I have already placed for you in the pinned comment, this weight you feel when certain presences enter your atmosphere is one of the most critical pieces of intelligence your spiritual system generates. And the tragedy is that most chosen ones have been trained to dismiss it as social anxiety or overthinking, rather than to honor it as the divine alarm it actually is. The narcissist, the energy vampire, the spiritually predatory individual does not simply arrive in a room and remain neutral while their envy quietly exists inside them. Envy at a certain intensity radiates. It has a frequency. It changes the electromagnetic quality of the atmosphere the same way a drop of dye changes the color of water, subtly at first, and then with increasing saturation until the whole environment carries its signature. The physical sensation you experience in those moments, the slight constriction in the chest, the heaviness behind the eyes, the vague unease that settles in the stomach without a named source, is your body accurately reporting a spiritual contamination event. The intrusive thought that follows is usually the attempt to rationalize it away, to find a social explanation, to locate the cause in something said or something visible rather than something transmitted. Honor the body report first. The mind can analyze after the body has been trusted. They came to you wearing the face of someone who had chosen you, and that is the specific cruelty of the Judas dynamic, the unexpected betrayal, the knife delivered by a hand you had already decided was safe. The chosen one's particular vulnerability to this attack is architectural. You do not extend deep trust casually. You are actually more careful than most, more observant, more attuned to incongruence. But the spiritual predator, who is sophisticated enough to target a chosen one, is also sophisticated enough to pass the initial assessments. They mirror your values back at you with precision. They speak the language of loyalty fluently. They demonstrate in the early season exactly the qualities you require before you lower the particular wall that protects what matters most. And once that wall is lowered, once you have decided that this is a person with access to your actual interior, the operation shifts. What comes next is not dramatic or sudden, it is gradual and structural. They begin quietly gathering the intelligence that the wall was protecting. Every vulnerability you share becomes a filing, stored and categorized for future deployment. Every sacred thing you reveal about your wounds or your dreams or your fears is absorbed and mapped. Not for the purpose of protecting you, but for the purpose of eventually having the precise coordinates needed to strike where it counts. The physical sensation of betrayal from someone you trusted at the level I am describing is not like ordinary disappointment. It is a full-body event, a nausea that starts in the stomach but radiates outward, a cold that has nothing to do with temperature, a disorientation that makes familiar things briefly unrecognizable, because the framework through which you understood reality just revealed itself to have been constructed on a false foundation. The intrusive thought in the immediate aftermath of this discovery is the question of your own judgment, the relentless internal inquiry into how you missed it, how you were deceived, what was wrong with your discernment, that it allowed this person past your walls. And this is where the enemy scores their deepest wound, not in the betrayal itself, but in the self-doubt that follows. Because a chosen one who stops trusting their own perception is a chosen one who cannot navigate by the spiritual instruments they were given. The Judas operation is specifically designed to damage the instrument. The spiritual tribunal examines the betrayal of a chosen one, not simply as an interpersonal failure, but as a deliberate spiritual assault on divine assignment, and the weight of that verdict falls on the betrayer with a completeness that they will spend years feeling, without understanding why nothing in their life can find its footing. You had a dog once, or you knew someone who did, or you have simply observed this phenomenon enough times that when I describe it, you will recognize it immediately as something you filed away without knowing why. A dog, specifically, a dog that knows you and loves you and has established a baseline of who is safe in its world, reacts with unusual intensity to someone that everyone else in the room has decided is fine. Not aggression necessarily, though sometimes that, but a persistent unease, a refusal to settle, a low vigilance that does not lift regardless of how much time passes or how many treats are offered. People laugh. People apologize to the visitor and explain that the dog is just tired, or that the dog is protective of its space, or that the dog is going through a phase. But the chosen one in the room, if they are paying attention to the layer of information the social contract usually requires them to ignore, notices something else entirely. The dog is reading the frequency that the human social contract has agreed to overlook. The dog has no investment in being polite. The dog has no fear of being called paranoid. The dog does not possess the social programming that teaches sensitive beings to override their own accurate perception in order to maintain the comfort of the collective. The dog simply reports what it detects. And what it detects in the person everyone is vouching for is the specific frequency of spiritual contamination that your own body has been reporting and you have been filing under overthinking. Animals, and particularly dogs, have been documented across centuries and cultures as barometers of spiritual atmosphere. The ancient world did not treat this as superstition. It treated it as intelligence. The chosen one who lives in proximity to this kind of animal data and learns to cross-reference it with their own body reports is developing a layered discernment system that is extraordinarily difficult to deceive over time. The narcissist, the energy vampire, the person conducting spiritual warfare against your assignment, they can manage their facial expressions, they can regulate their voice, They can construct a social presentation so polished and so consistent that the purely social layer of reality returns no red flags for months or even years. But they cannot manage their frequency. They cannot turn off the particular electromagnetic signature that a traumatized and predatory spirit emits. And the dog is receiving that signal clearly on a channel that no social performance can interrupt. The primitive memory activated in this scene is the one where you first learned to doubt your own accurate reports. The memory where a child's correct reading of a dangerous situation was overridden by an adult who needed the child to be wrong. That original dismissal of your reliable perception is the template the enemy has been exploiting ever since. Reclaiming it, insisting on the validity of what your body reports, regardless of the social cost of that insistence, is the specific healing this scene is calling you toward. The numbers arrive when the noise gets loud enough to drown the signal, when the manipulation has reached a density that makes it difficult to hold onto any thread of clarity, when the psychological warfare has produced enough fog that genuine navigation feels impossible. The universe deploys its simplest and most undeniable communication protocol. You look at the clock at 11:11, you wake at 3:33. The receipt total reads 222. The address of the place you are meeting someone significant ends in numbers that have been appearing in your environment for 3 weeks. You notice it, and then you wonder if noticing it is itself a kind of magical thinking, a pattern recognition error that your distressed brain is generating to create the feeling of meaning in circumstances that feel meaningless. But here is the precision I need to deliver to you about this particular phenomenon. The universe communicates through pattern and repetition with chosen ones, specifically because chosen ones are the only class of being sensitive enough to register the signal and awake enough to wonder about its origin. The numerical coincidence is not accidental, and it is not a neurological error. It is a navigation marker, a calibration ping from the spiritual coordinate system that governs divine assignment, sent to a frequency that is capable of receiving it in a moment when the chosen one is in danger of losing their bearings entirely. The psychological warfare dimension of the numerical signal is that the enemy knows it exists and actively tries to flood the chosen one's environment with enough confusion and noise to prevent the signal from being received clearly. The narcissist, who has orchestrated an atmosphere of chaos and self-doubt around your life, is not only extracting your energy, they are degrading your ability to receive divine communication. Every fight they manufacture, every crisis they generate or amplify, every night they cost you sleep, and every morning they cost you peace, is reducing the signal-to-noise ratio of your spiritual receiving equipment. The intrusive thought attached to this scene is the one that says the numbers mean nothing, that you are desperate for signs because the situation has become desperate, that you are manufacturing meaning because the meaninglessness of what you are surviving is too much to bear without it. And the spiritual action required is the opposite of dismissal. It is stillness. It is the deliberate choice to stop, to breathe, to hold the number in your awareness, and ask what navigation information it is carrying. Because the universe does not send calibration pings for nothing. 1111 in the ancient systems was always the marker of the door between